Hey everyone, so in this video I'm going to be going over the update to Firestarter. It's saying here that fixed Firestarter so that it will now proc from a multi-attack adrenaline rush. Now I'm trying to think about what fire starting tunes actually have a multiple attack adrenaline rush. I know that Steve has a multiple attack normal because when he rushes he actually does his 2000 burn, but his weapon is a better chance for a second attack. I guess the only fire starter that I can think of that makes a second attack on their rush would be Naya. And I'll show some film of how she interacts now when she makes that second attack with the burning effect. So Firestarter, whenever this character attacks a character suffering from burning, an adjacent target will be affected with a copy of that burning effect. Now, keep in mind with burn, if a toon is killed and they have burn damage on them, it will go to an adjacent toon if there are any turns left on the burning effect. So that's a decent way of applying flat damage to enemy toons, and it's kind of nice because something like bleed or maim doesn't do that, but burn is very specific. So I find it to be quite helpful. Now, in this video here, we're going to try and showcase how Steve can actually apply that burn damage and spread it. So when he rushes, he applies a flat 2000 burn damage to one enemy, but when we command him and he makes that double attack, we can see that the burning effect has moved to both Gao as well as Pete. But something that was also changed in that update, we're going to see Rhodey, who when she attacks, she applies 1000 burning to the enemy toon if they have more than 80% of their max HP, and that's on her weapon. But we're going to see how her weapon interacts with the defensive team, and we're going to notice when we attack with Rhodey, the burning is already spread. It's as if Firestarter is working off of that initial attack, so that's a little unique. So with some specific tunes, you could definitely utilize that. I'm thinking at least in Onslaught or maybe Survival Road, because she is a very specific character that a lot of people have been able to acquire as of late. So I think this could actually be pretty interesting depending on if there's any new fire starters that are coming out. And in Rhodey's case, even though it's only 1000 burn damage for 3 turns, that's 3000 burn damage over those 3 turns, which is a fair chunk of HP considering it's flat. Now, it's not as effective as bleed for stacking purposes because you can't stack burn, it'll just be the highest amount. So for Rhodey's case, 1000 is decent, Steve can do 2000, and then of course we have other characters where if you give them a burn mod, you can get something like 400 burn damage. I think that might be around the highest. But what we're doing right now, we're going to test out how this new interaction with burn actually works with other fire starting tunes if they're not using their basic attacks. Let's just say their rush, because Maggie in this case, she can apply burn on her rush, but that will not spread the burn as if it were a basic attack, because a basic attack is the only way to spread it unless the toon ends up dying. So in this case, we're just showcasing that when Maggie makes her rush, when she applies the burn to the enemy toon, it's not going anywhere, it's staying right on Pete. We can see that the burn goes to one toon for 2 turns. As soon as we attack him, we can see that the burn has moved to Kapoor, so now there's 2 characters with the 600 burning damage. And this last piece of video with Maggie is just to prove that her double attack weapon can still trigger Firestarter as well, kind of similar to what Steve does. But on the first turn, it is possible to spread burn to almost everyone on the enemy's team if you have a Firestarter who can make multiple basic attacks and a burn is actually applied to the enemy. Now when we go over to Naya, Naya is a pretty unique character. So 76 AP, when she rushes, deal 2 attacks of 300% damage to one enemy, deal 500 burn damage and 50% heal reduction for 2 turns up to 2 enemies. So she is using basic attacks when she rushes and she's applying that 600 burn damage. And I think something that is kind of interesting is that although Naya's rush is basic attacks and applies burn damage, her weapons on a basic attack can also apply burn damage. For the record, as I mentioned before, the 600 burn will take precedence to the 400 because it's a higher amount. but it's kind of interesting that she has these two methods of burning the enemy, and actually has an active skill that can burn the enemy at 500, which is right in between 400 and 600. So Naya, I think back in the day, was a pretty interesting character to get. I enjoyed her because of the multiple attacks, the burn, the spreading of a burn, and back in the day, 600 was a decent amount against a Toon's HP. Now it's, a very small fraction of how much HP some characters have, but I am interested in knowing if we're going to be seeing anything new coming out, because Naya and Steve and I guess Maggie are the only three characters that are affected by that burning update, the Firestarter update, I guess. So it's a little interesting to me. When we saw the update to Trauma, that was right when we got Willy. So it makes me curious to know what the future holds for us all. And now just a simple validation video, just to prove that when Naya ends up rushing, she applies the 600 burn to 2, but because it's a double attack, and with how Firestarter is now interacting, we're expecting to see the burn on 4 characters when she rushes. And that's exactly what we do see, but there's only a 50% heal reduction on 2 of the characters, being Pete and Glenn. I think this is just an interesting update that they've done. I'm wondering, because we just had those burn towers where it was 2,500 burn over 3 turns, it would be interesting to see if that somehow comes into play a bit more in other wars. Now, I do hope that it's at not as high of a percentage, because honestly, the 2,500 burn was just too powerful, and I think it's very easy to use and abuse. This last validation video is just to show that the 600 burn takes precedence over the 400, and although it is a little hard to see, we can tell that Gao is the only one with the 400 burn. So this is kind of important, I think. I like the update. I don't think it's that significant at the moment, but I always think that there's something more coming in the future. Now, as of late, I would definitely say we're seeing a lot more changes being made to the combat mechanics list. Different things are getting upgrades, camouflage got a pretty big upgrade, so now it's finally useful in matches, not just against walkers. Heal over time, it's already pretty good because it can stack. Bonus HP, it would be interesting to see if in the future it actually works against infection or not. That would be an interesting change. We just talked about Firestarter, which is different than Burn, of course. So I guess specialist skills is what we should also be looking at, but just looking at the different status effects, just the way that things are working. It's hard for me at times to imagine how they could improve upon some of these, status effects, but they improved upon Trauma in a pretty big way, where it's not just recovering from effects, but it's also resisting them. When we move into the specialist skills, we've actually seen a number of these things updated. Tenacity, it used to be, I think, 1% HP, but it's been moved up to 19%. Collateral damage does not give AP anymore. Lifesteal is based on a critical hit now. I don't think any changes here have been made. Neutralize, it might have been reduced to 80% instead of 90%. Lightning reflexes, I want to see a change. I think that weapon effects and mods should come into play if it's activated. No changes here yet. Waste Not, there was an FAQ saying that there would be. Outlast, it's now 100% AP. Retribution 2, so instead of just Retribution, same as Collateral Damage 2. Disarming was introduced to the game. A bunch of these skills were just introduced to the game, so it's kind of interesting to see them all listed out, because there's actually a huge number of different specialist skills, and it can be very difficult to remember everything. It's very hard to keep track, especially when they combine things, like dexterity is a combination of evasion and tenacity. I think there's just a lot of promise that some of these things could be adjusted or improved upon in the future, or new dual specialist skills are created that combine some of the ones that we are already familiar with. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching and listening to my video.